Hey everybody, Drew Dinkmeyer here at DailyRoto, taking you through a Week 11 lineup review. For me, it was a big week. I was able to push across a big Fanduel GPP win, winning Fanduel Sunday Million for $250,000, and the same lineup also won Fanduel Sunday Bomb for $100,000. Going to take you through the lineup that crossed the finish line here, that took home the victory, but also take you through a little bit of my lineup making process for GPPs and the tools that I use at DailyRoto to help make those lineups on a weekly basis. So let's start by looking at the actual lineup. You can see actually in this contest, I had 150 entries. A little over half of those entries were able to cash here, as you can kind of see in this depiction of where they were relative to the cash line this week. But the lineup that ended up taking it home with 194.6 points was led off by Drew Brees, paired with Mark Ingram. On the other side of that game, Jamison Crowder kind of bringing it back for a little bit of game correlation. LaShawn McCoy with Keenan Allen, again, a little bit of game correlation. And then Kenny Stills, kind of a one-off play. We were very high on the Dolphins wide receiving core this week. The Dolphins, since they've traded away Jay Ajayi, have been playing faster. They've also been throwing the ball a higher percentage of the time. And Tampa Bay's secondary has been vulnerable to big play threats throughout the course of the season. So we were very high on Jarvis Landry, Devontae Parker, and Kenny Stills. And Kenny Stills was the one who came in with 1% ownership here. Really, he and Keenan Allen at 1% and 4% kind of lifted this lineup and separated it from the competition. I had the Rob Gronkowski dud here at 16.5% owned, highest priced tight end on the slate at just 5.1 points. Had Steven Gostkowski, more exposure to the Patriots, who are going to be some of the most popular plays on the slate. But when you get stacks with the Patriots, oftentimes what you'll see is a little bit lower ownership on the kicker, because people want to have their stats scoring touchdowns as opposed to getting into territory, scoring field goals. So a little bit of leverage. Gronk and Gostkowski don't really correlate well together, and we kind of saw that here. And then finished off with the Ravens defense, which of the defenses on the slate, there were a lot of high-scoring defenses. The Chargers and the Jaguars we expected to be very popular. The Ravens were the team that I thought was flying a little bit under the radar, so use them in tournaments as well. They generated 26 points here with a shutout in Green Bay. Didn't have the touchdown scoring that some of the other defenses had, but that shutout really helps elevate the overall points scored. So looking at the tools that I use on a weekly basis, these are our projections over at DailyRoto, and you can see I have them sorted to FanDuel for the Sunday only slate, which is what this contest was in. And I have them sorted by value at the quarterback position. And what you can see here is, Tom Brady was projecting as our top quarterback. I don't think this is very unique within the industry. Tom Brady in a great matchup against Oakland, but followed by Alex Smith, Drew Brees, then Ryan Fitzpatrick, Jay Cutler, Carson Wentz, and Phillip Rivers. And what I do for tournaments is I like to look at where our projections like players that might be lower owned. So what I do is we also have ownership projections on the site brought to you by Unsourced Fantasy Collective. We've worked out a deal with them. They provide ownership projections for us for the NFL. It's a great partnership. They've been doing a great job this year. You can check them out on Twitter with Unsourced Fantasy Collective. But their projections, for FanDuel ownership on this slate had Tom Brady and Alex Smith well ahead of the bunch. Now, if you remember, going back to our value page here, Drew Brees was our number 3 value quarterback. On the ownership projections, he's coming in at like the 6th highest projected quarterback with an ownership projection, around 5%. This looked like a really good opportunity in tournaments to take advantage of, where you could get Tom Brady, you could get Drew Brees at 1/3 of the ownership of Tom Brady, and he's not necessarily 1/3 less likely to outscore Tom Brady or keep pace with Tom Brady. So that was a way to get a little bit of differentiation. At the running back position, if you sort by the projected ownership here, you can see that Mark Ingram was expected to be chalky. And I certainly knew that. When I was doing my Brees stacks, I was pairing Brees with either one of Ingram, Kamara, or Michael Thomas. Kamara and Thomas are the popular ones to stack Brees with. Ingram is a little bit less popular because he hasn't had as substantial a role in the passing game of late. But that role has been there historically. And also the Saints were a team with an implied total up over 30. There were many ways that they could score, 5 or 6 touchdowns in this game. And by having the primary running back in terms of the goal line usage along with the quarterback, you were kind of soaking up all of those touchdowns. Now, there was a little bit of risk. If Alvin Kamara gets a bunch of rushing touchdowns, you're in trouble. But you also have the upside if the two connect on a touchdown. They didn't, but they both were able to score enough touchdowns and generate enough yards to get to the top. And then LaShawn McCoy came in well below, Melvin Gordon, Kamara, Ingram, Hunt, all kind of priced in his range, but he's coming in at a third of the ownership in terms of the projected ownership of these guys. So LaShawn McCoy made an interesting contrarian play, and he made an especially good contrarian play when you look at the wide receiver ownership projections. So when you look at the wide receiver ownership projections, it was very clear that the Oakland and New England wide receivers were going to kind of dominate things. And then some of these, Miami wide receivers were up here as well with Devontae Parker and Jarvis Landry. Now, we liked most of these wide receivers. Our projections were in line. We had, Brandon Cooks is the best. We had Jarvis Landry and Devontae Parker up there. But there are occasional differences where our projections like a player much, much more than the field seems to like the player. And this was the case with Kenny Stills. And this was the case with Keenan Allen, who for us were top 10 or so values at their position. But in terms of the ownership, Keenan Allen was coming in at a projected ownership of about 5%. And Stills didn't even make the first page. So you have to search for Kenny Stills to find him with a projected ownership under 1%. Now, when you think about this from a tournament perspective, if Devontae Parker is going to be owned at 15% and Jarvis Landry is going to be owned at 11%, that's a lot of ownership on the Miami wide receivers. You're getting Kenny Stills, the biggest play threat of the group, arguably with Devontae Parker, at an ownership that is 1/10 or 1/15 of these guys, and he's much cheaper. So Kenny Stills was a guy that we liked. We thought coming into the week he might be cash game viable because he was the one kind of cheap wide receiver along with Jamison Crowder and Ted Ginn that were kind of standing out in our projections. Then he had the back issue that flared up during the week, missed practice on Friday, was listed as questionable, but they always said he was going to play. And it was clear that he just wasn't going to be owned, making him an exceptional tournament play. Same with Keenan Allen, who was projected at ownership at 5%. Well, these guys ended up coming in at 1% and 4% in terms of the ownership. So great job on the ownership projections by Unsourced Fantasy Collective there. And really a good example of how you can take advantage of getting players with similar projections to, Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree, who are going to be owned at way less than these guys, and take advantage of using them in tournaments. So that was really the thought process behind putting these lineups together, is trying to make sure I had exposure to lower owned pieces at positions that are historically more volatile, like the wide receiver position, the tight end position, drawing some correlation in the lineup with Drew Brees and Mark Ingram, and then with Crowder on the back end. And then what I'd said about McCoy, making him a more intriguing tournament play for me, was the fact that I had Keenan Allen. So if this game gets really fast-paced, or if Buffalo plays from way ahead and Keenan Allen's in catch-up mode, there was an opportunity for these two plays to correlate together. Now, it ended up working in the exact opposite fashion, where Keenan Allen helped the Chargers get into a big lead, and LaShawn McCoy was playing in catch-up mode. And LaShawn McCoy scored his touchdowns late. But the lack of depth on the Bills' running back depth chart with Mike Tolbert out and Tavares Cadet as the only true backup made LaShawn McCoy a little bit of a game-proof situational running back. You didn't have to worry about the game situation because they just didn't have a lot of running back depth. So the lineup ended up pushing ahead despite Rob Gronkowski's disappointing performance, despite some big threats, from Tom Brady and Brandon Cooks going off. Brandon Cooks, one of our favorite plays, but heavy ownership expected. I had lots of Cooks in other lineups. You can see some of my other entries here, finishing, top 250 or so. This was a Brady Cook stack that had some other, again, Keenan Allen as a lower owned piece, Jeremy Maclin as a lower owned piece. And on a week-to-week basis, what you're just trying to do in terms of tournaments is you're trying to stack the odds in your favor by taking advantage of ownership. So the Unsourced Fantasy Collective, the ownership projections that they're providing at DailyRoto are a big tool for us to be able to help our customers and our subscribers do that by looking at players that we already like from a projection standpoint. We already liked Kenny Stills. We already liked Keenan Allen, and just matching them up with players that are going to be a little bit low owned from the ownership projections, and then trying to attack those spots. So that was how I took my approach towards these lineups. I put 20 in the NFL bomb. You could see much more inconsistent success here. I had a lot of lineups that didn't come close to cashing, a few that were on the periphery, and then a few jumbled towards the top. And that's what happens when you're taking shots on kind of lower owned or weaker projected ownership plays. if you hit them, you're going to move to the top. If you miss completely, you're going to fall by the wayside while the Brady and Cook stacks kind of jump up. So I was fortunate. I had only really one lineup in contention this week, and it was able to end up taking home the grand prize. That's being a little bit fortunate when you don't have a really tight core of players. But using those ownership projections to find standout diamonds in the rough like Kenny Stills and Keenan Allen that our projections already liked is a winning long-term GPP strategy. So I was very happy to be able to put that to use this week and get rewarded with a nice finish. So if you're interested in checking out more of the projections and the ownership projections and all the stuff we have over at DailyRoto, we're actually having a free trial this Thanksgiving week. You can go over to dailyroto.com. You should be able to see some advertisements for the free trial. Get it. Take a look. Join us for the slate of Thanksgiving games. Hopefully it's something that you'll enjoy and you'll decide to stay with us long term. But it's a way to test out the product. If you've looked at some of the screen caps and some of the videos we've done and it's interested you before, this is an opportunity for you to get involved with the product and get involved with the community over at DailyRoto that we have going on. So that's this week's Week 11 lineup review for my winning lineup in the Fanduel Sunday NFL Bomb and the Fanduel Sunday Million. Hope everyone had a successful Week 11 and look forward to a great Thanksgiving and a wonderful holiday season. Hope all of you out there have a wonderful holiday season.